Thank you for joining us today for the Meritorious Military Series, State of the Firearms Industry. Today's panel is The Future of Gun Manufacturing and Sales in America. I will be moderating this panel. So our first panelist is Buck Pierson, Senior VP of Business Development for Staccato. Buck is a retired US Marine infantryman who deployed multiple times to conduct combat operations in support of the global war on terror, holding billets in rifle, weapon, and scout sniper platoons. During his career, Pierson's dedication to training, management, and marksmanship led him to become the Chief Instructor at the USMC Close Quarters Battle School and at the USMC Mountain Warfare Training Center. Post-military retirement, Pierson served in the private security sector, conducting firearms training and close protection duties. In 2018, Pierson joined Staccato to lead the military and law enforcement business development. Here, he was instrumental in the company's law enforcement growth, working with over 650 law enforcement agencies across the country to approve Staccato for duty, including US Marshalls SOG, Riverside County Sheriff's Department, Long Beach Police Department, and more. Thank you for joining us, Buck.
Thank you for having me.
Our second panelist is Jade Morde, editor for Shooting Industry magazine at FMG Publications. He joined FMG Publication in 2012, working in digital media and communications, later serving as managing editor for Shooting Industry and American Handgunner. Through working with both brands, Jade developed a particular passion for the business and marketing side of the shooting, hunting, and outdoor industry, and championing its backbone, the independent storefront dealer. He was named editor of Shooting Industry magazine in 2015. Morde published Shooting Industry's first ever women's issue in 2019, which has become an annual reader favorite. He also pens the monthly Industry Link column, providing dealers with business information vital to seasonal inventory planning. In addition to coordinating a team of content writers, Morde contributes timely content for Shooting Industry's weekly Dealer Advantage newsletter. Morde graduated from the University of California, Santa Barbara, double majoring in communication and political science. Shooting Industry has been published monthly since 1955 and serves 20,000 dealers and industry professionals in both print and digital formats. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for having us.
Perfect. All right, so Buck, we're gonna throw the first question your way. Though the pandemic has tapered down, we are witnessing the current administration's aggressive pushback on the industry. Please start us off with an overview of what you are seeing in terms of sales as a firearms manufacturer in 2022 and where you see this headed in 2023.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would be surprised when I say that obviously the firearms manufacturing industry is skyrocketed in the last 2 years. A lot of that obviously stemming from the political climate driving certain catalyst type events that have proven that society is not quite as stable as we see it in our day-to-day life. With that being said, there's over 5.5 million new gun owners just last year alone. And when you put that in perspective, 5.5 million people who've never owned a gun before are going and waiting in lines in some cases to buy a handgun or some sort of firearm because they feel they need to protect themselves. That in itself, I think, scares the current administration, to be honest. When you look at the various members of the administration, they've been very anti-gun for decades. It's not a new talking point for them. So when they see, in some states, mass anarchy happening in major cities and people who traditionally don't want anything to do with owning a handgun going and waiting in line for 6, 8, 10 hours at a time to buy a handgun, I think that worries them a lot because instead of them curbing the market, they're actually supporting the market by driving more demand for firearms. I don't see that changing going into 2023. Regardless of what happens politically or anything, I think society as a whole has finally seen that they're their own first responder. And when things go wrong, they don't have time to wait for help to get there. They have to be able to help themselves. So I think, if anything, we'll continue to see a spike in firearm sales for the foreseeable future, regardless of how our politicians try and attack that right. That's kind of where I see it last 18 months and where it's going in the next 12 months.
All right, thank you very much. Jade, similar question for you, but from the gun dealer and gun shop owner's perspective. In what ways are sales impacted by the current administration? And do you see this continuing into 2023, and in what ways?
Yeah, no, my answer would be quite similar to Buck in the sense where we're still seeing reports from dealers that things have tapered off a little bit. Earlier this year, there was like kind of a broad softening in the market, and it's unfortunate that fear-induced buying is such a motivator for folks to go out to their local gun stores, and obviously 2020 had the trifecta of the pandemic and the shutdowns, and to what Buck just mentioned, folks realized they need to be their own first responders, and then the social unrest in the summer, and then the election that was very contentious, to say the least, or later on that year. And so that kind of brought people into the market. And then, things were at record levels in 2020, 2021, and started 2022, started to taper off a little bit. But then, sadly, just with the school shooting, tragic school shooting in Uvalde, kind of kickstarted, interest on the left side of the political spectrum to trying to enact laws, and there's been several instances of that, obviously, over the last year and a half, 2 years with President Biden in office. But the anti-gun rhetoric certainly is continuing to drive people in to visit their local gun stores. And just a few days ago at the Democratic National Committee event, President Biden said that, among other things, that gun violence or guns are on the ballot, and our industries, of course, realize that. And that's one thing that we're trying to encourage our readers, the independent storefront dealer, to get involved in their communities and to try and reach out to those customers that are coming in and get them politically activated as well. And so I think even how the midterms go in a couple months, I still think that with the administration in place, they're looking to squeeze out anything they can, because they're not doing very much in Congress. They're looking for other avenues. So I still see folks continuing to visit their gun stores next year, and probably going to still see elevated. And even if both houses of Congress were to follow the Republicans, I still think that it's going to be a busy time ahead for the dealers.
All right, Buck, we're going to swing back to you. I'd love to hear more about the Staccato brand and mission and what makes these pistols game changers.
Sure. For anyone who doesn't know who's listening, Staccato obviously used to be STI, which was a company that was historically known for making competition pistols. When you look at the high levels of various types of practical shooting competition, the majority of the competitors were running some variant of a 2011, whether it be an STI or custom build. The reason for that is how much different these guns actually shoot compared to your traditional striker-fired gun that's out on the market. Obviously, with the restructuring, the restaffing, we're a veteran-led company now. That's from the executive team all the way down to our maintenance guy at the facility is a veteran. A lot of us looked at the why STI pistols had such a foothold in that particular market. And then we wanted to make that where we could service every facet of the market. The person who's just a hobbyist or recreational shooter, the law enforcement officer who's out there on a street and needs something that they can perform better with under stress should that arise. It's still servicing the competition market to an extent, but it's not the company's primary focus. It's really, at this point, we just want to make the best shooting handgun that we can and service the entirety of the industry so that people enjoy shooting and get into shooting sports and aren't so intimidated by how, the lack of fun that was out there to an extent before.
All right. Jade, so what other innovative guns have you seen hit the market so far in 2022?
Yeah, I will say, the handgun segment in particular has just exploded over the last, several years even. But in terms of the types of handguns being sold, there's the micro compacts and the compact pistols. It's just rampant sales for folks, for dealers, and especially, sadly with the supply chain challenges of the last couple of years, and just with the record demand, a lot of dealers are still, waiting for some of the early 2022 releases. We're just in our October issue that's just being published, actually this upcoming week, we had a dealer talk about the new 22 pistol from SIG. I think it's the P322, and that's introduced several months ago, and they're still trying to get models into their store. So speaking of SIG, I think they kind of, really added additional life into such a just vibrant segment with the P365 about 4 years ago when they introduced that. And 9mm compact pistols are that's what folks have been buying. And in the latest research or latest data available from ATF, they produce a firearms report each year that categorizes manufacturing in the United States from US manufacturers, and there were 6.5 million handguns produced in 2020, most recent data available, record. Of those 6.5 million handguns, 3.2 million were 9mm pistols. And it's about 3 out of every 5 handguns in 2020 that were manufactured in the US, not sold, but manufactured, were 9mm pistols. So in that segment, obviously, I mentioned 365, and that kind of kickstarted, obviously the Springfield Hellcat, Taurus GX4, and then those key lines have they've broadened their spectrum, broadened their availability, and new SKUs for folks to have. And SIG introduced their P365 380 earlier this year, so that platform is now available in 380. And then they had their X Macro, which is 17+1 round capacity. And then, of course, you have the additional variants for the Taurus and the Hellcats. And then even one thing we've experienced on our consumer side of our publication, American Handgunner, that the wheel guns are very much still popular, and we've had dealers as well in shooting industry talk about that with the Ruger Wrangler and the Heritage Rough Rider. Those small 22 single action revolvers, people still love shooting them and plinking. So those have been some room for growth in those areas, and then 10mm, and then anything that's optics ready as well has been very popular with folks.
Excellent. Well, personally, I live in New York, and so when I move back to Florida soon, I look forward to hitting up the range, because I really do miss shooting more frequently than I'm able to here, which is never. All right, Buck, let's talk about the military and law enforcement communities, which you have been instrumental in growing for Staccato. So please take us through what that entails, product strategies, how you get your pistols approved for duty, and so forth. We got some folks in the audience who are trying to market their own businesses in this trying time, so your insights will be very valuable to them.
Sure. I approached it from a very non-sales point of view. So my first step was to actually establish a relationship with the individuals at a few departments. And that means me going out there, meeting them face to face, getting past the getting to know you phase, and actually developing a meaningful relationship with members of those particular units in those departments. In so doing that, I would listen. What do you guys actually need? What do you actually want? Instead of what I often viewed from the industry of, an engineer would design something and then the sales team was tasked with going out and pushing it on people. I wanted to start kind of from the reverse side of that. I wanted to find out what law enforcement officers and some of the high-end units within LE were actually looking for in a handgun. That's where I started. And I started with the US Marshalls SOG, which I think most people probably know by now, Long Beach SWAT, and Riverside County Sheriff's Office SWAT. Went out, and what I found was they were all kind of looking for the same thing. They were all interested in our platform due to the ease of shooting, how easy it was to perform at a higher level with a 2011 versus a striker polymer gun. Having that capacity. And at this point in time, I came in at kind of the right time. 2018 was really when pistol optics started to be shopped around on the law enforcement side. So having a gun that was optics ready, was duty reliable, and was extremely accurate and easy to shoot, with a few other small details that they were looking for, I was able to then create a product. And I took all these list of items back to the factory, got our gunsmiths and our engineers and even our CEO on board at the time, who wasn't really sure it was the best idea to make this gun. And what we did was we made what was the original Staccato P, came out. We debuted it at SHOT Show in 2019, and we couldn't make enough of those. So the LE market specifically, was obviously, as a group, was looking for a pistol with all the same attributes that those 3 specific special units had been asking for. That gun we couldn't make enough of in 2019. We did some updates from R&D and future development, future product upgrades going into 2020. Relaunched the updated P, which we've had as a legacy platform for the last 2 years, and it's been the best-selling platform in the history of the company, predating Staccato all the way back to SDI's founding. There's not been a specific product model in our lineup that's ever sold as well as the P has. And I think that really comes from developing the relationship with the consumer market you're looking for face to face, not via social media marketing or anything like that, but a personal relationship. and then building the tool that they need and want. And not forcing something that somebody created in a vacuum on them, or was it trickled down from some other, large military contract or something like that that's now being sold on the consumer side. So that's really where I feel like we set ourselves apart from the industry, going back to 2018 and 2019, and how we were able to gain such a solid foothold in the law enforcement market in that time frame for a company that, for all intents and purposes, was known as a competition gun company that really had, somewhat questionable quality control over the years.
Okay, great. It's really terrific to see the progression of the brand. And I've had the privilege of meeting your CEO, Nate Horvath, in person, great leader. And so I'm looking forward to seeing where the brand goes, and hopefully go back to SHOT Show next year and then get my hand on some of those sweet pistols. All right, so Jade, we're gonna come back to you. Let's touch on the 80% lowers, or as the opposition calls it, ghost guns. Not a very friendly term. Gun enthusiasts have long since built their own platforms, and anti-firearms groups are trying to paint the picture that these are the weapons of choice for violent criminals. So what are some of the restrictions being imposed on individuals and gun dealers with regards to ghost guns, making it all the more difficult to do something that has been long since done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think NSSF says it well, and even on their papers just talking about this topic, that ghost guns are the gun control boogeyman, so to speak. And it's something that has been risen in prominence over the last few years. And obviously Biden announced, I think in 2021, that they're going to be targeting the so-called ghost guns. And I think the key phrase that's been presented by NSSF and others is that under the Gun Control Act of 1968, folks who deal in the business of firearms have to have their federal firearms license, or FFL. And so the key phrase is engaged in the business. And so this is kind of where business and hobbyists collide, was there folks that can purchase prior to this ruling, could purchase their kits, and they could get it milled out and get it modified to actually be able to make their own firearms. And so the DIY segment has been another source of growth for the industry over the last few years, especially as DIY has been a trend that's been impacting other industries that has now made its way here. But the ATF announced last month that these kits now have to go through, folks who are buying these kits have to go through a background check, and then even the retailers now have to, for their records for these firearms, they used to have to keep their records for 2 decades, for 20 years, and now it has to, as long as they're licensed by ATF, they have to maintain those records. So creating a whole lot of more, not pun intended, but more paperwork, and also just to have record keeping. And there's a quote from Merrick Garland, our Attorney General, that when this was introduced, I just wanted to read it briefly and just kind of the holes in the logic there. But he said that this rule will make it harder for criminals and other prohibited persons to obtain untraceable guns, and that it'll help reduce the number of untraceable firearms flooding our communities. And the sad, reality is the definition of a criminal is they're going to break the law. So it's impacting the law-abiding gun owners the most, and as is most of the legislation, almost all of it that's being proposed by Congress is impacting the law-abiding gun owner, and but the criminals aren't going to listen to these new laws. And there was a recent survey from a government agency that said that 90% of incarcerated inmates said that they obtained their firearms illegally, or black market source, or from a friend or family member. So these further laws really aren't going to, it's just creating more red tape for folks that want to enjoy the sport, or enjoy, having that DIY component to making their firearm.
Yeah, I find it super interesting because my family were FFL Class 3 in Florida. And, people will say, hey, I want XYZ done on mine. So they're talking about the lowers, and they're made either of steel, I guess polymers, some of the other, like plastic, whatever you want to say. And what they're telling the FFLs is that if you have one come into your possession, you need to engrave the serial number. So you're going to do a serial number, but then you have to have the name of the FFL. Below that, you have to have the address. Then you have another code that's like 4 or 5 lines of details that get engraved on these lowers. And so again, the irony is it depends on the material. The FFLs don't have an engraving capacity on site. So then the recommendation was, oh, you should take your lowers to a local trophy shop and have them do it. And then the irony there is that you have to sit there while they do the engraving. And so that's not logical, is it? To sit there for 2 hours, and to make sure that the gun is still in your possession legally, etc. So it's just all these loopholes. I think that they're trying to, screw over the American people. Pardon my French. All right, Jade, let's stay on that subject. We are seeing a growth in the ATF revoking gun dealer licenses. How are they doing this? Why are they doing this? What are the long-term ramifications?
Yeah, well, this goes back to what I kind of mentioned earlier, where it's, Congress has been inept in passing meaningful legislation, especially what the left is trying to do with, I know with the Congress, lower house of Congress passed the so-called assault weapons ban, but it's not going to get any movement in the Senate currently. But it's another example of President Biden weaponizing an agency, and in this case, weaponizing the ATF. And he, I think last year mentioned that there's if you listen to the speech talking about rogue dealers, it's like they're on every corner trying to sell guns to anybody with a heartbeat, and not having any regard for the laws, which just isn't fact. But it's a real shame. And in the past, ATF and the firearms industry, which might be surprising, and I've attended the NSSF congressional fly-in on Capitol Hill several times, and even in conversations with the elected officials there, they are often surprised to hear that the industry has a complementary relationship with ATF, respectful relationship in the past. And I've heard a lot of firsthand accounts of manufacturers that will have the ATF agents. If they come in, they can kind of show them or even offer help if there's like a serial number that has been removed from firearm, just other ways to identify it. And so it is a shame that now these days that the ATF has this zero tolerance policy, and they're targeting retailers. And earlier this year, in President Biden's in his goodness, I'm looking at my notes. He had in his budget, he had 160 industry operations investigators, and those are the ones who would target the zero tolerance inspections, versus 140 special agents, which is the first time that these industry operations investigators have outweighed the special agents. So clearly showing that he wants to have more investigators to go out to dealers. And the long-term impact of that is going to be that the dealers, we've heard firsthand accounts from dealers that they, their field agents that they've been in touch with, they're now almost afraid to touch base with them, having a question, and not wanting to raise a red flag and have someone come in. And there's another dealer I've heard that she had a clerical error a few years ago, and they at the time it was like a slap on the wrist from the ATF, like don't do that again. And but that case has since been reopened over the last year as a result of this new policy, and her license is threatening to be revoked, and so she's having to have lawyers on her behalf and trying to get somewhere with the ATF in that sense. And so more money being spent, and so it's just putting lawful businesses out of business is the tactic that they're using. And it's unfortunate, because the industry previously has had a good relationship with ATF, and it's not looking that way currently, unfortunately.
All right, Buck, let's talk sales and marketing. Anything firearms related these days has a slim to no opportunity to market. So, Google ads, that's out. Social media, that's out. Personally, I host a lot of events. Those related to firearms are essentially shadow banned. I use LinkedIn predominantly for that. So how are new and emerging brands like Staccato reaching their target audiences?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that's happening, because they're basically, by doing that, they're attacking the Second Amendment by voiding the First Amendment. To me, that's the bigger problem, is they'll take away your right to free speech to attack an industry they don't think should exist, that's protected under the Second Amendment. As far as marketing for Staccato, it really hasn't affected us a lot, because we're very much down in the trenches, kind of guerrilla company when it comes to how we rebrand it and how we execute. So we don't use a lot of paid print media. We don't pay influencers to peddle our guns on Instagram or anything like that. Our employees are getting out and meeting our customers face to face. It's very much not a business transaction for us. It's we want to know our customers. After customers purchase a gun from us, we actually have multiple initiatives within our company where we're reaching out to them, sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly, sometimes semi-annually, calling everyone that we can find that's bought a gun from us to check in on them. So we're very much a customer-facing company, and as we scale and get larger, we haven't lost sight of that. If anything, we're staffing against that so we can continue kind of that momentum that we have without losing kind of the grassroots company that we started as. So I think the easy answer for a workaround is know your customer, get in front of your customer. You'll find quickly you don't need Google, you don't need Facebook, you don't need 25 influencers from Instagram peddling your stuff for you, because they're going to know all the employees from your company. We have people reach out to us weekly to come and take tours of our facility. We take them on tours, we take them shooting, we show them everything from raw forgings to finished product. We're very transparent when it comes to that with our consumer base, and we're always going to maintain that going forward, no matter how big we get.
Okay. All right. So opposite that, what marketing trends and opportunities are you seeing for gun dealers and gun shop owners, Jade?
Yeah, I know Buck mentioned it, I think, in the first question, just how many first-time gun buyers have joined our ranks. It's 5.5 million last year. I think it was maybe 8 million in 2020. And so the numbers are just continuing to rise, which is just very encouraging. So there, for all intents and purposes, over 10.5 million new opportunities available to the industry to target those new customers. And the positive thing for the industry as well is they're not, which is no more that people have said that gun owners are stale, pale, and male, but the new gun buyers the last few years are just shattering that. And even prior to the pandemic, but the new gun buyers are women, they're minorities, and even the mainstream outlets like our associate editor, she sent me an article this morning from CNN that talked about that they're acknowledging that there are a lot of women and minority buyers, which you wouldn't expect them to want to be promoting that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for the industry to continue to get these folks out in training. I know Smith & Wesson has their Gun Smarts videos that kind of reach out to those customers that are new and trying to get involved. And Shoot United is another organization trying to introduce those folks or to get them plugged in more into the shooting sports. And then another positive too is the youth shooting sports have exploded as well over the last few years. It's been on a very strong upward trend. Earlier this year, the Scholastic Clay Target program and the Scholastic Action Shooting program had their national championships in July, and they broke records for the largest event that they've ever had. And a cool part of the press release that we highlighted in the past as well is they said that 2,200 entries and athletes were there, and they fired over 500,000 rounds of ammunition without incident. And it's a very safe sport and something that the left obviously wouldn't want to highlight. So that's been encouraging as well. And even last week, the USA Clay Target League said that they're breaking their previous record for this fall coming up with 13,000 participants. So it's good to see. So those are, starting with all these new first-time buyers and the youth that are growing as well. Those are good opportunities for a viable industry.
Well, I'm proud to share that I have converted a number of my female friends into firearms owners. It's that person-to-person connection, taking them to the range, and they realize that you have control over this. This is the tool of the trade. I also took up sporting clay. It is so much fun. I can't tell you. I just love it. But some of the rifles that I want, boy, they're very expensive. All right, Buck, let's round out this panel with Staccato's support of our military and law enforcement communities. What events do you have coming up? How can folks get involved?
So the biggest event we have coming up is our Celebrating Heroes event at our new factory that we're building in Florence, Texas, October 27th through the 29th. This entire event we're hosting is a fundraiser for the Fallen Blue organization, which, if nobody has heard of it before, Fallen Blue basically raises money to donate to the families of officers who are killed in the line of duty. So this helps pay for downed officers, college funds for their kids, things like that, et cetera. Helps the family, survive in that rough transition phase of losing a loved one. This festival is going to be huge. We're going to have training involved. We're going to have multiple different types of competitions involved that are open for everyone. We've got some virtual reality stuff going on there. Craig Morgan is coming and playing a concert, and some other local Texas VIPs, et cetera, are going to be there. General Scott Miller, retired 4-star general from the Army, is going to be giving a leadership speech while he's there as well, and then hanging out in the crowd all 3 days that he's there. So it's a very family-focused event that is 100% fundraiser for Fallen Blue. You can learn more about that on the Celebrating Heroes website, LinkedIn through the Staccato website, et cetera. I'll be around to post the links for all of that after this, but that's the biggest event we have this year. On the smaller scale stuff, obviously we'll be at USCCA this year. We'll have a booth set up there, and we were just at NTOA conference, and we have some other small things rounding out this year before we all show back up for SHOT Show in January.
All right. Can you share with us one more time the dates and location for the major event?
Yeah, so the Celebrating Heroes event is October 27th, 28th, and 29th. The physical location will be in Florence, Texas, which is about an hour north of Austin. You would need to fly into Austin if you were going to fly in for it. The closest place to stay with hotels, restaurants, etc., would be Georgetown, Texas, which is where our current factory is. And it's about 10, 15 minutes away from Florence.
Awesome. I wish I could make it. All right. Thank you, Buck and Jade, for sharing your expertise today. To our guest, thank you again for attending today's Meritorious Military Series, State of the Firearms Industry.